Hi, my name is Anna James, and I go to Ashland University in Ohio, and I have the privilege of introducing Marji Ross. Today, her topic is Happily Ever After, Combining Marriage, Kids, and Work Successfully. For nearly 2 decades, she served as president and publisher of Regnery Publishing, which is the nation's leading publisher of conservative books. She joined the organization in 1999 and in 2003 and was the first person outside the Regnery family to become Regnery's president and publisher. Marjorie worked closely with high-profile celebrity authors on their books, including Newt Gingrich, Dennis Prager, Molly Hemingway, Laura Ingraham, Donald Trump, and many more. Under Margie's leadership, Regnery placed more than 85 books on national bestseller lists, including 14 titles at #1, and Regnery doubled in sales. Margie oversaw launches of several successful imprints, including Regnery History, Regnery Kids, and Salem Books, as well as the rebirth of Regnery's historic Gateway imprint. In 2020, after moving from Northern Virginia to Charlottesville, Virginia, she founded a boutique consulting firm for celebrity authors, media companies, and thought leaders called Marji Ross Consulting. She helps these authors conceive, create, and publish and promote their books for maximum impact. She regularly writes a blog, which can be found on marjirossconsulting.com. Her specialty is nonfiction books, specifically on current events, military history, faith, overcoming adversity, leadership, and business. She was ranked one of the 100 most influential Republican women in 2017 and was awarded the Clare Boothe Luce Center for Conservative Women's Woman of the Year in 2005. Marji serves on several boards, including the Clare Boothe Luce Center for Conservative Women's Board of Directors, and encouraged the president of CBL, Michelle Easton, to write her book, How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. Marji frequently speaks at conservative conferences and for the publishing industry. She graduated from Dartmouth College with a BA in English in 1981 and earned her master's in journalism from American University. She has 3 daughters, and her husband live outside Charlottesville, Virginia. Now please help me in welcoming Marji Ross.
Thank you very much. Good morning. How are you? It's nice to see you all. Well, a lot of what I have to tell you just is a good riff off of what Mercedes just told you, because she and I and Michelle and other women in the organization here have the benefit of having a very supportive spouse. And what, a lot of what I think you're going to hear today will be troubling, right? I mean, we're living in a very difficult time, and you're going to hear from Lisa Daftari, you're going to hear from K.T. McFarland, you're going to hear from Ying Ma, you're going to hear some very sobering news about what's going on in the world that you're, I'm sure, already well aware of. And as I like to often say, put your own oxygen mask on first, right? You all have to be strong if you're going to help the people around you. They're going to rely on you, and they're going to need to rely on you. And every one of you in this room is going to be a leader in some venue where other people are going to rely on you. And so a lot of what I want to share today is my advice on how to do that, and how to strengthen and enrich your life, honestly, not for yourself, but for everybody else around you and everybody else who's relying on you. So a lot of times when I'm introduced as a book publishing consultant or the former president of Regnery, and people talk about all the best-selling authors I've worked with. As you heard, many of the names, probably every conservative author that you can think of, I worked with at some point or another, and that including a lot of very strong female conservative authors, whether they were in politics or in media or even in business, which really taught me a lot. But today I'm going to talk to you about a different job I have, because in a lot of ways, for most of my life, I felt like I had 3 full-time jobs, right? Book publisher or book consultant, mother, wife. And we don't really talk about the other two a lot of times when professional women get up to give advice, especially from the left, but even from the right. We talk a lot about issues and we talk a lot about business. And today I'm going to talk to you about how to put those all together and how I did that in my life and what I learned along the way. And hopefully some of those lessons will be valuable to you. I say 3 full-time jobs because at some point I feel like I'm doing all of those jobs all of the time, right? My professional job, wife, and mother are all things happening all the time. I don't try to, box them off into separate rooms in the house and do one at a time. I'm a good juggler, and most successful women I find are good jugglers, are good multitaskers, and that's something you will learn. It's a skill you can learn in business that you can apply to the rest of your life, and it's an important one. But I'll start at the beginning. So I'll tell you the beginning of my adult life when I graduated from college and I set off to find a job. I started by just thinking about what I liked to do and what I was good at doing, right? Like most of you. So I knew for me, I liked writing and I liked editing. I liked publishing and communication. So I found a job. And my very first job was at a small PR firm in Washington, D.C. that handled real estate and commercial development, about which I really didn't know anything. But it was a chance to write. It was a chance to learn. And it was a business founded by a woman, run by her, and all of the employees there were women. Small PR firm, all women. And so I was young. I was single. And so basically my approach to my job was, because I really didn't know anything about work, was just to work harder than anybody else. That was my first resolve. I'm just going to work harder than everybody else. So I threw myself into my job. I just committed to learning everything I could and to try to get better at it every day, which wasn't hard because I was starting down here. And so I had a lot of headroom. And I also tried to be the most productive person in the organization. I might not have been the most experienced or the smartest or the most skilled, but I could pump out some work, and that's how I tackled that first job, just to be the most productive person in the room, to be the person who was the first person who came to mind when they said, well, who could do this, right? I raised my hand and volunteered to just do everything that I could do and learn how to do it along the way. And so I got better just through sheer practice. And I got sort of a reputation for working hard. And that's one of the best reputations, I think, early in your career that you can have. My youngest daughter now has a new job. She's recently out of college. She works for the Ad Council, and she works on a lot of healthcare issues. And she said to me the other day, she said, Mom, all of my friends say, you work harder than anyone I know. I said, yes, I taught you something. That's good, because that's a good way to start out in your career, especially when you don't yet have a spouse and a family to take care of, right? So I learned how to write press releases and how to organize events and how to work with the media. But I learned 2 really valuable things that have stayed with me throughout my career. And I learned them both from my first boss, who, as I said, was a woman entrepreneur. She'd started the business by herself and grown it over about 15 years. And she had some really big, influential corporate clients. And so the first thing I learned was the importance of service in my job. And I'll tell you the story. So the president of this company, her name was Suzanne, and our company put on a lot of events for big corporate clients. And so we were having one of our open houses for one of her most influential clients, and it was a grand opening of a hotel that he had built. And so we had a big crowd. We had caterers and photographers and journalists all bustling around the client. And he was the CEO of this big commercial development firm. And I remember Suzanne, gracefully, she took his hand, she steered him through the crowd to meet one of the most important journalists who was covering the events. And then she just very sort of gracefully took his jacket. He was holding his jacket, his suit jacket. He didn't kind of know what to do. And he also had a drink in his hand. She just took his jacket and she took his drink so that he could have this conversation with this journalist. And I remember at the time thinking, oh, God, she took his drink, she took his jacket. It's like, God, what is she, the busboy? I mean, come on. But I was completely wrong about that. Because what she knew, and I eventually learned, was that she was making herself indispensable to this client. She knew exactly what he needed. He needed to be free to talk to the journalist. And it wasn't about her. And it didn't matter how she looked or what role she took, as long as she was doing what she needed to serve him. And I'll tell you what, she was one of his most valued consultants, advisors. She was a very high-level advisor to this guy. And she earned his trust by understanding that her job was to be of service to him. And I remember starting to understand that there's a big difference between service and subservience, right? She wasn't below him in any way. She was very much his peer. But she didn't worry about her position or how she looked. She was worried about helping him do his job and being successful because that was her job at the time. So I remember I just wanted to be just like her. I wanted to have good judgment, to know what was the answer to the problem that a communications client had, and how to make sure that the journalist would cover his business in a way that helped him succeed. But I also learned that it was much more important for her to be valued by him than the public. It didn't matter what everybody around thought. It mattered what he thought, because he was her client and she was working. She had a job to do to make him successful. And that, of course, made her firm very successful along the way. And so I thought a lot about who is important to serve and who is it important to you to have high opinion of you. And oftentimes it's the people you know the best, and not worrying about playing to the public, right? Playing to an audience, playing to the crowd. And the funny thing, of course, is oftentimes what you find out is if you earn the respect of the people closest to you, you actually also get the respect and admiration of the people further away. I learned one more thing from Suzanne. She was single, and she was all about her career, and she was probably about 45 at the time. She had no children, she had no spouse, she had a little dog, and she went home at the end of every day to her beautiful townhouse and her little dog. And she had a lot of friends, but she did not have a life partner to share all of her success and her happiness and her troubles and her triumphs. And I realize over my life, I have known a lot of very successful women. You can think of a lot of very successful women, especially in media. But the happy ones that I have known are married. It's not to say you can't find happiness elsewhere, but that is my experience. So I left this small PR firm, and I went on to become a business editor at the Washington Business Journal. And of course, I love business and I love journalism. So now I was combining two things that I liked in my career. And that's another piece of advice that I've often given my daughters and young women like you, which is, I know do what you love sounds like a cliche, right? It's like, well, sure, I'd love to do what I love, but nobody's paying me for that. So it sounds kind of like an impossible task. But what I really mean by that is to think a little bit differently about that, okay? So it doesn't mean you can have your dream job immediately, but every job is made up of, different tasks and challenges and assignments and responsibilities. And so what your challenge is, especially at first, in my opinion, is to find something in the job that you like to do, right? Just find one thing that you really like to do and get good at it. And then as you go through your career, try to find a way so that the pool of things you enjoy doing in your job grows, right? So first you're just doing one thing you like, and then you have to do a lot of things that aren't maybe not that much fun, but they're necessary. And then add to that another thing that you like and expand that as you go. You'll discover that you enjoy things you didn't even know you would like doing, but you also will have an opportunity to get better and more skilled at more things. So for me, I love to write and I love to edit, but maybe you like to do that too, but even if you like to solve problems or puzzles, or you like to be creative, or you like to plan and organize things, in every single job, from waitress to restaurant owner, from administrative assistant to CEO, there are ways to pursue what you love, and that's what you need to look for. So my next job was as an editor of a newsletter for the American Institute of Architects, about which I also didn't know anything, but it was a really fun job because I was editing and writing. There was a business element, and I also discovered the whole world of newsletters, which I didn't even know existed. And, I said a minute ago, you can't have your dream job immediately, but the other thing to realize is you probably won't know what your dream job is until you discover it. You might not even know that job even exists. I didn't even know there was a whole industry of newsletters, but that was a wonderful opportunity for me to learn about publishing and writing and editing and business, and still being the hardest working person in the building. But all this time I was single. Right? I had a lot of friends and family supporting me, but I wasn't married yet. And that changed when I went to my next job. So I went to work for a wonderful man named Tom Phillips at Phillips Publishing. And I got, again, chance to combine a bunch of things that I liked. I liked writing and editing. I liked business. I liked newsletters. I discovered that. So now I was editing a business newsletter. But I also had the good fortune that one of the people who interviewed me for that job wound up being my husband. Well, my first husband, but we'll get to that in a minute. I didn't go to that job looking for a husband, right? And I didn't know when I was interviewing with Marji Ross that we would ultimately fall in love and get married. But I did know that I loved what I was doing. I was getting closer to that dream job. I also knew I wanted to be married and I wanted to have children. So I approached this job the same way I had approached previous jobs, looking for the things I love to do, being committed to working really hard, being really productive, and keeping in mind some of those other lessons, right, about service and supporting other people, about gaining the respect of the people closest to you and not worrying about your fame or your byline. And as I was working and getting better at what I was doing, I got to know a colleague at work who was already very good at his job and willing to help me with mine. Very much like what Mercedes said a few minutes ago. Not only did we enjoy each other's company, but we respected each other. We shared a lot of the same values. We shared a lot of the same interests. We discovered that we had a lot of the same dreams and a lot of the same values and beliefs and a lot of the same taste in things. And much like Emma, in one of my favorite Jane Austen novels, I discovered one day that the person I loved was the person who had become my best friend. And so I'm going to take a pause for a commercial announcement because a few years ago, Regnery published a book called The Jane Austen Guide to Happily Ever After, which sort of borrowed that title for the title of my speech, although, side note, titles can never be copywritten, as every book publisher knows, something to file away. But anyway, I mentioned that book because I think it's maybe one of the best books at providing insight into what makes a good marriage, the Jane Austen Guide to Happily Ever After. And like my story, it basically rejects the myth that finding someone compatible and appropriate is unromantic. On the other hand, it can be the most romantic path possible, and one that's much more likely to lead to true happiness, which is another topic we'll come back to shortly. So for 13 years, I worked at Phillips Publishing. My life blossomed professionally and personally. I went from an assistant managing editor to a senior group publisher, and I went from single Marji Grant to married Marji Ross with 3 daughters. And I think there were a few important lessons that I can share with you to my success. First, I was lucky enough to work for a company that valued family. They are out there, and you should look for them. It's very important. You can tell right away whether a company values family. I worked hard. I didn't take off a lot of time for maternity leave, but the company was very, very flexible in allowing me to take time when I needed to and be there when my daughters needed me. Not every hour, not every day. There are definitely trade-offs and times, I'm sure, when my kids would have preferred that I was home, and I wasn't, but I was able to adjust my schedule for my daughters. And a lot of that flexibility is earned, right? When you're the hardest working person and you're the most productive person, you often earn the flexibility and the right to have more time off. And of course, partly it was a function of the kind of job I had. Different jobs allow for more flexibility. My sister is a midwife, and she has 2 daughters, excuse me. And when somebody goes into labor, she cannot be flexible. She has to be there to deliver the baby. But she has a different kind of flexibility in her job, right? She does a shift at the hospital, and when she's there delivering babies. But when she's off, and she can schedule her time with her daughters as much as possible to be when she knows she's going to be available. So I think we look for jobs that suit us, but we also look for different kind of versions of flexibility, and you can find a lot of different versions of flexibility. But the second secret to my ability to grow my career and have a family was finding the right husband. And this is something, of course, Mercedes talked about also, okay? For me, that was a husband who wanted children as much as I did, and somebody who was committed to being involved in their lives. He did not hesitate at any role, whether it was changing diapers or driving forgotten homework to school, chaperoning field trips, going to school plays and concerts. We had a lot of those. His devotion to our family was an essential part of our happiness. And then, when I was 46 and my daughters were 16, 14, and 9, he died. And I felt many things. Shock, grief, sadness, emptiness. I remember telling somebody I felt like a planet that had kind of gone out of orbit and was no longer tethered to anything. And it was my daughters who saved me. They wrapped their love around me, and together we faced our life without him. And I learned several more things. I learned the amazing kindness and selflessness of other people. I had hoped that was true, but I never really experienced it until I needed it, and I prided myself on not being a needy person. But I learned how valuable that was to have that network of friends and family. I also learned that keeping busy and surrounded by people was therapeutic. And I learned or relearned the value of service. This time, service wasn't to advance my career. Service was the single best way for me to recover from grief. And I dove into volunteering. And within a year, I was on 4 different boards, including this wonderful one, volunteering to help a variety of organizations as a way to recognize that there's, a big world out there and more things going on and more people, and everyone has grief and sadness and challenges to overcome. And if you can help them, you're also helping yourself. So I have to go back just a couple minutes in my career path and explain that during that time, I had, before my husband died, I had moved from Phillips Publishing to Regnery. So I went from the world of newsletters to the world of books, and now that was indeed my dream job. For somebody who grew up loving books and reading books, the idea of becoming the president publisher of one of the most prestigious and influential independent book publishing companies in the country was a dream come true. But it was a big job. It was a demanding job, an all-encompassing job. So how did I do that job and my other jobs at the same time? And to be honest, I did the mother part better than the wife part for a long time. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that. So I adore my 3 daughters, as anyone who spends more than 5 minutes with me knows. They're amazing. They're smart and funny and kind and competent and articulate. I could go on and on. And from a very early age, for them, I treated them as amazing people. This is advice. And I had very high expectations for them, very high. And I didn't set those to test them or stress them out, though I may have stressed them out a little bit, but simply because I truly expected them to be extraordinary. And I realize that sounds like a lot of pressure, but I've talked to my daughters a lot about this, and we often joke about it. And I think they know, I know they know that my high expectations for them were really an expression of my extremely high opinion of them. They don't always succeed. They don't always excel, but they know I believe in them. And so they always try to do well and to do right. And the way I put it is I have great confidence in them not to be perfect, but to do their best. That's was my approach to mothering. There are a couple other things I've done as a mother that I think explain our happiness. First of all, I try to involve my daughters in my work. There are some people who are like, leave it at the office, go home, it's all about your kids. That works for some people. That was not my approach. My approach was to involve them in what I do. I would take home book jackets and say, which one do you like, this one or this one? I would talk to them about the different authors I was working with and what their lives were like and what we were planning. And so they would started enjoying going into a bookstore and looking for the books that had the Regnery logo on the jacket, maybe putting that one on the top of the shelf and taking the competitors off and putting that underneath. That's done all the time. And they also, we also talked a lot about politics and current events because that's what our books are about. And at first they paid attention to that because that was what my job was, and eventually they started paying attention to that because they understood how important it was in their own lives. And I often would take their advice. I listened to their input, value their opinion. And so they knew that. And I thought back when I was a kid, part of my happiness was knowing that my mom thought I was great. I just knew it. I was certain. And when I was pregnant, I remember worrying, what if I don't feel that way, right? What if the baby comes out and I'm like, I don't know. What if I'm not sure? Well, they'll know if I'm not sure. But I honestly believe that is what the grace of God gives us. As soon as I held each daughter in my arms, I knew she was amazing. And because I felt it, she was. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't times when my daughters and I have argued. There have been times. My middle daughter, Trina, is a true perfectionist. Now, I know this because one day she said to me, Mom, people tell me I'm a perfectionist, but I mean, there are lots of things I do that aren't perfect. To which I was like, okay, Trina, that is the definition of a perfectionist. And so that's led to some headbutters between us, but we've always known that we had each other's backs, that I was always there rooting for them. The other thing I taught my daughters, which is very important as a parent, so here's another little piece of advice, file this one away, is it was very important to me to teach my daughters how to interact with adults. And I don't know if you've noticed that, but right, I bet all of you ladies have seen other women your age and peers as you're growing up, and even now, who are not very good at interacting with anyone except people their own age. That's a really important skill to teach your kids. It's so valuable. Looking adults in the eye, right? When you speak to them, speaking clearly. When they ask a question, pay attention and answer it. That's something to teach your children. It seems like a simple thing, but it will give them a huge advantage in life and give them also a sense of self-confidence and assurance, but also respect for the people they're talking to. And my daughters have often told me how surprised they were to realize that a lot of their friends didn't know that, and also how much that's helped them in their lives and in their careers. And so as I'm, juggling these different jobs, people would ask me, well, how do you balance work and home? And I would tell them, I don't think of it as a balance. I think of it as a blend, as like a big stew where I throw everything together. Everything gets mixed in together, and it's all richer because it's cooked up together. And that's been my approach. But as I said, I was a lot better at the mother part than the wife part. To be honest, I thought a lot about what it meant to be a good mother, but I didn't really ask myself, what does it mean to be a good wife? And you look at pop culture and you see it's cool to be a mother, right? I happen to be a big football fan. I know that's a weird hobby, but there you have it. So I love watching the Super Bowl, and what was the big line of the Super Bowl was Rihanna. Was that a baby bump? Is she pregnant? Everybody's talking, right? Two of my daughters went to a Beyonce concert this summer in New York, and again, she has, as you may know, her 11-year-old performing with her, and set aside for a minute whether that's a good idea, but I have to say she's involving her daughter in her work. That's good. But for many celebrities and influencers, their husband, the kids are front and center, but their husband is kind of irrelevant or even non-existent. And I know that Rihanna and Beyonce both have very famous husbands who are celebrities in their own right. But even for them, our culture doesn't seem to ask, what does it mean to be a good wife, right? So for the most part, being a good mother is in vogue, but being a good wife still sounds a little unfashionable, a little shameful even in pop culture. And so when my first husband got sick, I remember finding myself thinking a lot about what it means to be a good wife, not just the sickness and health thing, but the whole question of support and service, and of celebrating the amazingness of my spouse just as much as I did of my daughters, and of caring more about his happiness and comfort than my own. As the head of Regnery, I got plenty of recognition. I got a lot. And I worked with big celebrities, influential politicians, presidents, first ladies, second ladies, if you will, all of them on books as senators and congressmen and people who are, big celebrities on TV. But the person who has my back, who always cheers for me when I have a big seller or when I have a flop, is my husband. And when you find the right husband, you have to accept the responsibility to be a good wife. You have to remember to cheer for him too, right? To ask yourself, what makes him happy? What makes him feel important or proud or good about himself? You have to make sure that he knows you think he's amazing. So a few years after my first husband died, I began to think about dating again. I knew I didn't want to live the rest of my life single, and my first husband gave me a great gift shortly before he died. He knew me, and he urged me to find someone else after he was gone. He knew I didn't want to be alone. And so I did. I found my husband, Chuck. In many ways, he's very different from my first husband, but in a few essential ways, he's not. He's very smart. He's very articulate. He loves language and books. He's also deeply generous with his love. Look for that. And he's also proud of what I do. And he likes, getting involved, and he gets excited about new books and new authors, and he listens to me complain when I have a problem, and he counsels me to be patient and to be my best self. I realize I'm very fortunate. I know a lot of my success has been the happy accident of great timing. But being successful is not the same thing as being happy. And too many women, and men for that matter, chase after success and leave the happiness part behind. I know the title of my speech, Happily Ever After, combining all these things, is ambitious. Because I want you to be both successful and happy. And there are many paths to happiness. I've shared with you some of mine, but it's not the only way to be happy. Certainly, you each have to find your own path. But I just want to remind you of a few of the lessons I learned along the way, and the ways I would encourage you to think about combining all those things together. So first of all, remember that there's a big difference between service and subservient. Remember the value of that. Be the hardest working person in the room. Do what you love, no matter what job you have. Find the thing that you love and be good at that. We'll try to work hard at all of it, but be good at the thing you love. Choose a good husband and work hard. That's only half, right? Choose a good husband and work hard at being a good wife. Make sure the people you love, husband, kids, sister, everyone, make sure the people you love know that you think they're amazing. Life is a stew. Remember, you can combine all these things together. You don't have to choose one or the other. And last but most important, success is not necessarily happiness, but happiness is success. And that's it. I'll take some questions if you have any. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Claire. I go to Texas Tech, and I'm a senior accounting major. So I know you mentioned that there are companies that value, family. I'm interviewing with a lot of companies right now. What are some questions I can ask that'll sort of give me some insight into that?
That's a great question. And some of the obvious questions I think are not the right questions, like what's your leave policy? That's not a good first question to ask. I actually had somebody come in and their very first question is, what's your vacation policy? It's like, what? How about permanent? How about forever? No, I didn't say that. But I do think that there are a couple different kinds of corporate culture. And I think those can betray or give you an insight into what they value, right? So I've often talked about these two types of corporate cultures. One is the sort of zero-sum game, where it's very competitive and people are vying for this limited amount of success. And the other one is what I call the success breeds success. And that, to me, is more, everyone's cheering for everyone else. Everyone else is celebrating success. And so one of the things that I think can be very helpful in asking is, how do you define success? What does success look like in this company? And just let them talk, and you will hear all kinds of things. Sometimes it will sound, oh boy, very metric driven, very, task oriented and very competitive. And there's nothing wrong with competition, that's fine. But other times it will sound much more collaborative, right? And much more about the whole person. And I think that can be one of the most interesting ways to find out what that company values. The other thing I would ask is whoever you're interviewing, I would ask them their path. Like, how did you come to this company? What's been your experience? Where were you before? Just ask, and you can see, right, how they traveled the journey, and that can give you some insights into whether the company is supportive of and whether the other people around you are going to have some of the same values that you do. So those are the two things I would ask.
Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
I may have missed it, so excuse me. After you lost your first husband, how many years did you wait until you married your second, and how did you meet him?
4 years between the two, and 3.5 years between the two, and I met him online. And it's funny, right? It took me a long time to admit that because I was kind of embarrassed. But when I was at work, after the first after the first 6 months, people started suggesting. I was like, no, not ready. But maybe after the first year, people, at work would try to introduce me to someone and fix me up. But at that point in my career, it just seemed really awkward to meet someone through somebody else I worked with, because I just thought, there's so many ways this can go wrong. There's so many ways that I can, upset someone that I know or have a relationship with. And when you're the president of the company, it's a unique, position where you feel like you don't want to have, you don't want someone who reports to you or works for you to feel like they're, in an awkward or different position than they were before. So I decided I'm going to go outside the circle, and and so I met him online. And now, at first we didn't tell people that, and then eventually everybody we met their spouse or significant other the same way. So I got more comfortable saying that I did. Thank you. Yeah, sure.
Hi, Marji.
Hi.
So you talked about hard work, and I wanted to see if you have any advice for women who do work hard and who are able to excel and succeed in the workplace, but who end up facing a lot of jealousy.
Yes.
And before you answer, if I may give you an example from my own career path, I sort of wish I had you as an advisor back then, but my first job out of college, I did what you did, except even though you weren't advising me, I worked really hard. Yeah. It was a nonprofit gig. They didn't pay very much, but they did tell me there are lots of opportunities. You can spend your time doing whatever it is your job is supposed to be, but you could do other things. Right. And so I stayed late, and I worked weekends, and I did do other things. And one of the things I did was I wrote a lot. I published my first op-ed in the LA Times when I was 23. And in the 2 years that I was at that organization, I published multiple op-eds. And every time that happened, I noticed that my colleagues, particularly the ones my age, were not particularly happy. They didn't rejoice in my success. And on one of those occasions, one of the senior members of our organization sent around my op-ed and with a note saying, I hope all the other younger staffers would find inspiration in Ying's work. And then, of course, after that, I felt that people hated me even more, particularly the other young ladies to whom I had no hostility. But and of course, if I ran into something like that these days, I would handle it very differently. But I do think that sometimes for young women who do work hard, the reaction from other women, particularly from liberal women to conservative women, can be very hostile, and I wonder if you might have any advice for women in those situations.
That's a great question, and that, I think we've all faced that. A couple things that I would suggest. One is, there are always going to be people who are not cheering for your success. So part of it is just, resign yourself to that. But I think the other thing is, goes back to something I said a little bit earlier, which is don't worry about having your name on it. Don't worry so much even about, a byline or getting credit. Obviously, if you're a writer and that's part of your career, it is important. But what I was going to say is if you find that you're doing all this stuff by yourself and getting all this attention or credit and, the boss is sending it around making everybody feel bad, what I would do immediately is think of something you could do with someone else. Think of a project you could do with a partner or a group and get a group of people together and say, hey, let's do this together. Because as soon as you have other people who are bought in, they all get the credit, everybody gets to shine. You can maybe help them, teach them something, be of service to them, but you've now expanded the group of people who actually will also benefit from working hard and going the extra mile and doing something extra. So I would say if it's not just be the hardest working person all by yourself, but absolutely look for, start with one person. There's probably somebody you can find who's like, you know what, we could do this together. Why not do it together, right? And then you can start building a little group, and all of a sudden people are going to want to join the group rather than resenting. There's too many people to resent them all. So rather than resenting or being jealous of the one person who's getting all the credit or the attention. So that's what I would recommend. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Nicole Allen. Thank you so much for speaking. But I wanted to ask, how would you recommend? I think our culture can be very divisive with women in career.
Yep.
Around either you're a family woman or you're going for your career and there's no in between. But I think so many girls in this room obviously have the passion for both.
Right.
So how would you navigate that stereotype or what that looks like practically?
Yeah. I mean, I think that a few things. One is you will find, I think, that there are a lot of, you're sure you're already finding this, there are a lot of people who silently agree with you, right? There are a lot of people at your schools who actually agree with a lot of what you think, but they are not going to say it out loud. They're not going to speak up. And I think the absolute same thing is true with work, and family, where there are a lot of other women who would actually like to do both and sort of, are very dissatisfied with the proposition that you have to choose and you can't do both. So I would say, honestly, look for the people who share that with you. And, when you're at school, the work is not just your classroom work, right? It's getting involved in other organizations. It's getting involved in bringing speakers to your campus. It's getting involved maybe in in a faith-based organization or some other sort of social organization that you, or nonprofit that you can contribute to. That is sort of a prep for work, right? Mm-hmm. And I would just look for the other women there who share your values and share that sort of worldview that you can have both. The other good thing is, A, it's really easy now to work from home. B, there's a huge amount of flexibility now in the workplace. And so, there's a lot, I think the old stereotype of, well, you can't, go to an office or place of work full-time and be a good wife and mother are also, those lines are blurring because it's so easy to be home, to be flexible, to put together a constellation of work that's different from the old traditional way of doing it. So I think, each of us is going to pursue a different kind of work and a different kind of career. And so depending on what path you pursue, you might be able to just sort of abandon all the stereotypes and come up with, a new version of what it looks like to be successful.
Awesome. Thank
that's
you.
helpful.
It
Sure.
was.
Hi, I'm
Hi.
Dana Howard, go to Liberty University. I just had a quick question about transitioning from already working full-time, already going to college full-time, and doing about 70% of siblings' care, who's 5 years old, of transitioning to eventually going to law school next fall, and who's going to be clear across the country, and trying to make that transition easier from secondary parent and also working full-time and being a college student to trying to focus on just being a college student or just working, and to where they don't feel that sort of abandonment, if you will, but to where I can focus on what I need to do in order to progress in my career.
How old of a sibling?
He's 5. He's in kindergarten, so very, very not as independent yet.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting challenge, and that's good for you that you're both, willing to embark on that and asking the question, how do I make sure that I don't abandon, that he doesn't feel abandoned, and I can make that transition. I think a lot of it actually has to do, a lot of things that look natural and easy are actually the result of really good planning. Right? I mean, I love people who say, oh, I love those people who get up and give a speech with no notes. So therefore, I'm not going to write my speech. Okay. The people who get up and give a great speech without any notes are the people who worked the hardest and practiced the longest at doing that speech, not the people who didn't invest in the time and the planning and the thought beforehand. So I think what you have to do is be very intentional, right? I would say you probably need to make sure you schedule time to FaceTime or Zoom or whatever with him regularly, so it's something he can count on and something he can look forward to. So I would make sure you do that. And I would also, I think it's probably, I think it's possible to get him excited about what you're doing. If you're excited about it, he might share in that excitement. So maybe there are some things that you can share with him about what you're doing or how you're going to use it, or just somehow relate it to something that he can understand so that he can feel a part of it. I think a lot of times one of the hardest things, and this is why I don't do the work is at the workplace and families at home, is because I always felt like if my daughters could understand why I was excited about work, then they could also be excited about and feel part of it, feel like they were part of it. So I would look for ways to maybe make him feel part of it and share stories and share things about what you're doing and share your own excitement, so that he can sort of feel like he's still a really important part of your life, and understanding why you're doing that rather than feeling like you're choosing something instead of him.
Thank you.
Sure. Anything else? We're good? Okay. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marji.